It has long been a source of some consternation to me that in my chronicles of the remarkable exploits of my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I have been compelled by circumstance or discretion to omit a full account of certain cases. Some, like the deplorable affair of the politician, the lighthouse, and the trained cormorant, are simply too scandalous to commit to paper, even in this more liberal age. Others, however, were left as mere tantalizing fragments in my notebooks, their conclusions known only to myself, Holmes, and the few souls unfortunate enough to be entangled in their web. Such was the matter of the Dundas separation case, a singular affair which I have hitherto only mentioned by name, but which tested my friend's unique faculties in a manner quite unlike any other. The year was 97, a year marked by a curious lull in the criminal underworld of London. The conclusion of the dreadful business of the Netherlands Sumatra Company had left a vacuum, and for a period of some weeks the newspapers were filled with little more than political squabbles and society gossip. For Holmes, such a period of inactivity was a torment. I would find him at all hours of the day alternating between melancholic airs upon his violin and furious, evil-smelling chemical experiments which often drove me from our quarters in Baker Street altogether. His mind, that magnificent engine, required a constant stream of complex problems upon which to turn its power. Without them, it would begin to race and grind upon itself, a prospect that was both alarming and distressing to witness. It was on a dreary Tuesday in October, when the fog lay so thick upon the city that the gas lamps opposite were but hazy, spectral glows, that the first stirrings of this peculiar business made themselves known. I was attempting to read the latest issue of The Lancet by the fireside, while Holmes, having exhausted his store of shag tobacco, was irritably pacing the room, his long, thin frame casting a restless shadow upon the walls. "Watson, your placid temperament is a constant source of wonder to me," he said abruptly, stopping before my chair. "How can you sit there, calmly absorbing medical trivia, when the greatest city on earth lies dormant and bereft of any intellectual challenge? It is a desert of the mind." "If you are bored, Holmes," I replied, setting down my journal, "perhaps you might occupy yourself by finally cataloguing your monographs on the polyphonic motets of Lassus. Or perhaps—" "Trifles, my dear fellow, trifles," he interjected, waving a dismissive hand. "What is the use of cataloguing the past when the present is so insufferably dull? I crave a problem, Watson, a three-pipe problem, something to stretch the faculties to—" He was cut short by a sharp rap upon our front door. Holmes froze, his head cocked like a terrier at the sound of a rat. "At last," he whispered, a spark of life returning to his weary eyes. "A footstep upon the stair, Watson. A client, if I am not mistaken. A gentleman of some means, judging by the deliberate and confident tread. He is agitated, however. Note the slight unevenness in his ascent. He hesitates. Yes, he is composing himself before he reaches our landing. Now, let us see what fresh perplexity London has chosen to lay at our door." A moment later, Mrs. Hudson showed in a man who perfectly matched Holmes's rapid deductions. He was tall, dressed in a well-cut but sober tweed suit, and carried himself with an air of professional gravity. Yet his face was pale, and his hands, as he clutched a fine leather portfolio, trembled almost imperceptibly. He was, I judged, a man in his late 40s, a solicitor, or perhaps a man of finance, caught in the grip of some profound anxiety. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he inquired, his gaze darting from my friend to myself. "I am he," said Holmes, gesturing to the vacant client's chair. "And this is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, in whom you may confide as you would in myself. Pray be seated, sir, for you have clearly come upon an urgent matter." Our visitor sank into the chair and placed his portfolio upon his lap. "My name is Alistair Finch," he began, his voice strained. "I am a solicitor with offices in Lincoln's Inn Fields. It is not on my own behalf that I have come, Mr. Holmes, but for a member of my family. My sister Eleanor, Mrs. Mortimer Dundas." He paused, swallowing hard, and Holmes merely nodded, his eyes half closed as he absorbed the information. "The name Dundas is not unknown to me," my friend remarked. "Mortimer Dundas, the ornithologist, author of the Avifauna of the Lesser Antilles, a masterful, if somewhat pedantic, work." "The very same," Mr. Finch confirmed, looking somewhat surprised. "He is a man of science, Mr. Holmes. A man of logic, of facts, of precise and verifiable observation. That is what makes this entire situation so monstrous." "And what situation is that?" Holmes asked, his languor vanishing entirely, replaced by the keen, hawkish intensity I knew so well. Mr. Finch leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Mr. Holmes, my brother-in-law, a man I have known for 15 years as a model of rationality, is seeking a legal separation from my sister. And the grounds upon which he is doing so are those of nothing less than sheer gibbering madness. Indeed, in my experience, the legal grounds for separation are quite clearly defined. Cruelty, adultery, desertion. To which of these does he lay claim?" The solicitor shook his head, a look of despair on his face. "None of them, sir, not in the conventional sense. His claim, which he has put to me in my professional capacity with the utmost seriousness, is that the woman currently living in his house is not his wife." I confess I started in my seat. Holmes, however, remained impassive, save for a slight raising of his eyebrows. "Not his wife?" he repeated calmly. "Do you mean to say he accuses her of being an impostor?" "Precisely," cried Finch, thumping his portfolio in agitation. "He does not claim that Eleanor has been unfaithful. He does not claim she's been cruel. He claims that she, the woman who shares his table, who manages his household, the woman he has been married to for a decade, is a stranger, a fraud, a doppelganger who has, by some black magic, taken my sister's place." "Most singular," murmured Holmes. "And your sister? What does she say to this astounding accusation?" "She is on the verge of a complete nervous collapse, Mr. Holmes. Imagine it. The man you love, your husband, looks at you one day as though you were a phantom. He subjects her to endless, terrifying interrogations. He asks her about the day they met, about a holiday they took to the Italian lakes 5 years ago, about the name of a childhood pet. And if her memory differs in the slightest detail from his own, he marks it down in a ledger as further proof of her imposture. He measures her height against the doorframe. He examines her teeth. He has become her jailer, a cold, clinical inquisitor in her own home. She lives in a state of perpetual terror." "This is a grave matter indeed," said Holmes, his expression now serious. "But it sounds more like a case for a medical man than a detective. Has Mr. Dundas been examined? Is there a history of mental instability in his family?" "None whatsoever," Finch insisted. "He is, to all outward appearances, as sane as you or I. He runs his household, corresponds with his scientific colleagues, and continues his work. But on this one single point, he is intractable. He is convinced that the real Eleanor was somehow replaced some 2 months ago. He has even identified the supposed date of the transference. And what evidence does this man of science present for this extraordinary theory? Mr. Finch opened his portfolio and drew out a sheaf of papers filled with a small, precise script. He has compiled a list of discrepancies. It is the work of a madman, yet it possesses a terrifyingly logical structure. Allow me to read you a few examples. He adjusted his spectacles and began to read. Item 1. Subject's palate. For 10 years of marriage, Eleanor has expressed a marked aversion to sugar in her tea. The present subject takes 2 lumps without comment. When challenged, she claimed her taste must have changed, unlikely for such an ingrained habit. Item 2. Literary recall. I inquired as to her favourite passage from Browning's Andrea del Sarto, which we read together on our honeymoon. The subject quoted a passage, but it was the incorrect one. She became distressed when I pointed this out. Item 3. Physical marks. Eleanor has possessed a small, crescent-shaped scar on her left wrist since childhood, from a fall against a greenhouse. The subject possesses no such scar. When I demanded an explanation, she wept and claimed it must have faded. A scar of that nature does not simply fade. Item 4. Penmanship. The subject's handwriting, while superficially similar, lacks the characteristic upward flourish on the terminal R that is present in all of Eleanor's letters prior to August of this year. Finch put the papers down, his hands shaking. It goes on like this for pages, Mr. Holmes, a catalogue of tiny, trivial details that he has woven into a tapestry of insanity. A misplaced memory, a change in taste, a faded scar. Any of these could be explained, but in his mind they are irrefutable proof. He wants me to draw up the separation papers and have her committed. He believes himself to be in grave danger from this cuckoo in his nest. Holmes had risen and was now standing before the fire, his back to us. The fog-shrouded street outside was silent. "Tell me, Mr. Finch," he said, without turning around. "This scar on the wrist. You are her brother. Does your sister, to your knowledge, possess such a mark?" "Why, yes," Finch exclaimed. "Of course she does. We were children together. I was there when she fell. It was a nasty cut." "And have you seen her wrist recently, to verify its absence for yourself?" The solicitor shifted uncomfortably. "Well, no. In the current climate, one can hardly ask one's sister to bare her arm for inspection. It would be indelicate, but Mortimer is obsessed with it. He claims it is the most conclusive proof he has." "Curious, very curious indeed," Holmes murmured, almost to himself. "A man of science, you say? A man who trusts only the evidence of his own senses. And his senses tell him his wife is an impostor. The world tells him he is mad. Which is correct? Or is there perhaps a third possibility that has occurred to neither?" He turned, and the familiar fire of the hunt was blazing in his eyes. "Watson, this is no longer a desert. I believe a most singular and instructive little problem has presented itself. Mr. Finch, I shall be happy to look into this matter for you. I must, however, speak with both parties. I will call upon Mrs. Dundas tomorrow morning, and I must also have the pleasure of a conversation with this most observant ornithologist. A man who notices the flourish on a terminal R is not a man to be underestimated, whether he be sane or mad. Our client departed with a palpable sense of relief, leaving a handsome retainer upon the mantelpiece. Once he was gone, I turned to my friend. "Holmes, this is surely a tragic case of delusion," I declared. "The poor man's mind, strained by overwork, has clearly snapped. The list he has compiled is a classic example of paranoia, of finding sinister patterns in the mundane." "Perhaps, Watson, perhaps," he said, filling his clay pipe and settling into his armchair. "And yet it is the nature of the observations that intrigues me. They are not the vague, grandiose claims of a typical lunatic. They are precise, microscopic. The sugar in the tea, the scar, the handwriting. These are the very details upon which I have built my own career. It would be a grave error to dismiss them out of hand simply because the conclusion drawn from them appears preposterous." He lit his pipe, and for a long while the only sound in the room was the crackle of the fire and the gentle bubbling of the briar. "Think, Watson," he said at last, through a cloud of blue smoke. "There are 4 possibilities. First, as you suggest, Mr. Dundas is mad, and Mrs. Dundas is his unfortunate victim. Second, Mrs. Dundas is for some reason attempting to drive her husband mad, perhaps by deliberately altering these small habits to prey on his obsessive nature. Third, both of them are mad, a rare but not unheard of folie à deux. And fourth—" He paused, pointing the stem of his pipe at me. "The fourth possibility is that Mortimer Dundas, the man of science, is perfectly sane, and his unbelievable assertion is, in fact, the simple and literal truth." With that chilling thought, he fell silent, and I was left to ponder the extraordinary tangle that had been laid before us. A case where the lines between sanity, identity and deception were as blurred and impenetrable as the London fog outside our very windows. The following morning the fog had lifted, to be replaced by a thin, persistent drizzle that gave the city a melancholic, grey sheen. We took a cab to Richmond, where the Dundas residence was located. It was a handsome modern villa of red brick, set back from the road behind a meticulously manicured garden. The entire property bespoke order, precision, and a quiet, scholarly prosperity. There were no feminine touches of overflowing flower beds or whimsical garden ornaments. Every hedge was clipped to a perfect right angle, every patch of lawn unmarred by a single weed. It was the garden of a man who classified and controlled nature, rather than one who merely enjoyed it. We were shown into a drawing room that was furnished with expensive but severe taste. The air was cool and still, and a faint antiseptic scent of camphor hung in the air. A moment later, Mrs. Dundas entered. She was a woman of perhaps 35, with delicate features, large, fearful blue eyes, and a complexion that had once been fine, but was now pale and drawn with anxiety. She was dressed elegantly, but her hands were clasped so tightly together that her knuckles were white. "Mr. Holmes, my brother Alistair said you would be coming," she said, her voice a low, trembling whisper. "I am at your service, madam," Holmes replied, his tone gentle but his eyes sharp and observant, taking in every detail of her appearance. "I understand you are in a position of some distress. Pray tell me your story in your own words." Tears welled in her eyes, and she sank onto a sofa, dabbing at her face with a lace handkerchief. "Distress is too mild a word, Mr. Holmes. I'm living in a nightmare. My husband, the man I have loved and honoured for a decade, looks at me with the eyes of a stranger. He studies me as he would one of his birds. He notes my every word, my every gesture, in his dreadful little book. He has accused me of being a spy, an actress, a demon sent to torment him. "When did this behaviour begin?" Holmes inquired. "About 2 months ago. We had returned from a field trip to the Norfolk Broads. Mortimer was collecting specimens. At first it was subtle, a strange question, a lingering analytical stare. Then he began the interrogations. He claimed I did not remember the name of the inn we stayed at, that I had packed his specimen jars incorrectly. I put it down to fatigue, but it grew worse day by day. Now he barely speaks to me, except to lay another verbal trap, to try and catch me in some perceived lie. Your brother mentioned a specific piece of evidence upon which your husband lays great store," Holmes said carefully. "A scar upon your left wrist." Instinctively, the woman pulled the long sleeve of her dress further down over her hand. "The scar," she whispered, her face growing even paler. "Yes, it was from my childhood, a silly accident. He says it is gone. And he is right, Mr. Holmes. I have looked myself. It is no longer there. It must have faded over the years, surely. Such things happen." "May I?" Holmes asked, his voice soft. With a trembling hand, she pushed back her sleeve and extended her arm. Watson and I both leaned forward to look. The skin on her left wrist was smooth, pale, and utterly unblemished. There was no trace of any scar, crescent-shaped or otherwise. Holmes examined it for a moment without touching it, his face unreadable. "I see," was all he said. "Now, Mrs. Dundas, I must ask you some questions which may seem impertinent, but I assure you they are essential. Do you have any enemies? Is there anyone who might wish to harm you or your husband, or to drive a wedge between you?" She shook her head helplessly. "No one. Mortimer is a reclusive man, devoted to his work. We have few social acquaintances. Our life is quiet. There is no one." "And your family? Besides your brother Alistair?" "Our parents are long past," she said. "I was an only child, or practically so." Holmes's ears seemed to prick up at the qualification. "Practically an only child, madam. That is an unusual turn of phrase." Mrs. Dundas flushed. "It is a painful subject, Mr. Holmes, a family tragedy. I had a sister, a twin sister. Her name was Clara, but she was unwell. From birth, her mind was not as it should have been. She was prone to violent fits and strange delusions. When we were 6 years old, after an incident where she tried to harm me, my parents made the difficult decision to have her placed in a private institution in the north, the Clayfield Asylum. She passed away there from an influenza epidemic when she was just a girl. I am sorry to have brought up such a sad memory," Holmes said, though his eyes burned with a sudden intense light. "Did you ever see your sister again after she was sent away?" "Never," she whispered. "My parents thought it for the best. I have only the vaguest, most fragmented memories of her." Our interview was interrupted by the sound of a firm, deliberate footstep in the hall. The door opened, and a man stood upon the threshold. He was tall and spare, with a neatly trimmed grey beard, a high, intellectual forehead, and pale, chillingly dispassionate eyes that peered at us from behind gold-rimmed spectacles. This, I knew at once, was the ornithologist, Mr. Mortimer Dundas. "I was not aware we were expecting visitors," he said, his voice as dry and precise as his writings. He did not look at the woman on the sofa, pointedly ignoring her presence. "This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes," she said faintly. "My brother sent for him." Dundas's expression did not change. "Indeed, the consulting detective? And for what purpose has your brother engaged his services? To prove that I am mad?" "I assure you, sir, my faculties are perfectly intact. I am a man of science. I deal in empirical evidence, not hysterics." "It is precisely your devotion to evidence that interests me, Mr. Dundas," said Holmes smoothly. "I have heard your theory. I should like to hear the facts upon which it is based." A flicker of something, perhaps triumph, passed through the man's cold eyes. "At last," he said, "someone who will listen to reason. Follow me to my study. We shall not be disturbed there." He turned and walked away, leaving us to follow. His wife remained on the sofa, a small, desolate figure in the oppressive silence of the drawing-room. Mr. Dundas's study was even more severe than the rest of the house. The walls were lined not with books, but with glass-fronted cases containing hundreds of stuffed birds, each one perfectly preserved, labelled and categorized. It was a silent, feathered mausoleum. He bid us sit and went to a large desk, from which he produced the very ledger his brother-in-law had described. "I began my observations on August 22nd of this year," he began, opening the book. "That was the day after our return from Norfolk. I noticed a subtle change in her demeanour, a certain watchfulness. I initially dismissed it, but the discrepancies began to accumulate. For the next hour we were subjected to a lecture of breathtaking detail. He recited the list of changes, from her sudden tolerance for sugar to her inability to recall the name of a distant cousin. He showed us letters from years past, and compared them to recent notes, pointing out the microscopic variations in handwriting with a pair of calipers. He spoke of a slight change in her gait, a new habit of humming a popular music hall tune she had previously despised. It was a performance that was both brilliant and terrifying. He presented his argument with the dispassionate clarity of a barrister, building his case piece by piece. He was not raving, he was reasoning, albeit from an insane premise. "But the scar, man!" I exclaimed, unable to contain myself. "Surely that is a simple trick of time. Scars fade." Dundas turned his cold gaze upon me. "Dr. Watson, I am a biologist. I am familiar with the processes of cellular regeneration. A superficial scratch may fade, yes, but a deep gash to the dermis, caused by glass, as Eleanor's was, leaves a permanent trace. A fibrous tissue that does not vanish. Her scar is not faded. It is absent. The tissue on her wrist has never been traumatized in that manner. It is, forensically, the wrist of another woman." Holmes had been listening in absolute silence, his chin sunk upon his chest. Now he looked up. "Mr. Dundas," he said, "let us for a moment accept your hypothesis. If this woman is an impostor, what has become of your true wife?" A shadow crossed the ornithologist's face. "That is the question that torments me. I do not know. This creature, this actress, will not say. She merely weeps and feigns ignorance. Is my Eleanor a prisoner, or is she gone? I believe this impostor is part of some conspiracy to gain control of my estate. By having me declared insane, she and her hidden confederates would achieve their goal." "A plausible motive," Holmes conceded. "One final question. You mentioned your wife has a brother, Alistair Finch. Has the impostor been able to deceive him also?" Dundas gave a short, humourless laugh. "Finch is a sentimental fool. He sees his sister as he wishes to see her. He does not have my training. He does not observe. He sees the superficial resemblance and is satisfied. He believes I have lost my mind. It is the perfect crime, Mr. Holmes, to replace a person so perfectly that the one man who notices the difference is dismissed as a lunatic. We left the house shortly thereafter. The image of that cold, logical man and his terrified, weeping wife burned into my mind. As our cab rattled back towards central London, I was more convinced than ever that we were dealing with a case of tragic mental decay. "Holmes, the man is certifiable," I declared. "His obsession has blinded him to all reason. He has constructed a prison of evidence from which he cannot escape." "And yet, Watson," Holmes replied, his eyes fixed on the passing streets, "did you notice his desk?" "His desk? I saw nothing but a clutter of papers and scientific instruments." "Precisely. Among the calipers, forceps and files, there was a small bottle containing a solution of silver nitrate, a common enough chemical. And its significance? It is used in a variety of processes, including, if my memory serves me, the development of photographs. But it has another, more obscure use known to forensic specialists. It can be used to reveal latent prints and marks on skin that are invisible to the naked eye. It reacts to the chloride in skin secretions, which are different over scar tissue. A cold dread crept over me. "Holmes, you cannot mean you do not believe him?" "I believe nothing yet," he said sternly. "I am a man of evidence, just as he is. But unlike Mr. Dundas, I have not yet reached my conclusion. He has observed a series of facts and constructed a single fantastical theory. My task is to see if those same facts can support a different structure altogether." He said no more for the rest of the journey, but I saw his brow was furrowed in the deepest concentration. Upon our return to Baker Street, he immediately dispatched a series of telegrams. One, I saw, was addressed to the Chief Medical Officer of the Clayfield Asylum in Yorkshire. For the next 36 hours, Holmes was a whirlwind of activity. He spent a whole afternoon in the Public Records Office, and later emerged from his bedroom in the guise of an elderly, down-at-heel clergyman, an impersonation so perfect that he nearly fooled me. In this disguise he was gone for several hours, and returned late in the evening, covered in mud and smelling faintly of gin, but with a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He offered no explanation for his excursions, and I knew better than to ask. The reply to his telegram arrived on the second day. Holmes tore it open and read it, a single sheet of paper, his expression hardening as he did so. He handed it to me without a word. It read, "Re. Clara Finch, subject deceased, 1879, influenza, body interred, St. Giles Parish Churchyard. Records confirm Dr. Stephen Carruthers." "So that is that," I said, with some relief. "The twin sister is long dead. The poor woman in Richmond is who she says she is, and her husband is mad. The case is solved." "On the contrary, Watson," Holmes said, taking the telegram back. "The case has just begun. This telegram confirms one thing only, that the official records state the sister is dead. It does not confirm that she is dead. Remember, Watson, paper can be made to say anything. A corrupt doctor? A bribed parish clerk? A death certificate is not proof of death, merely proof of a statement." He turned to his chemical corner. "My inquiries as the clergyman were more fruitful. I have learned that 2 months ago, just prior to Mr. Dundas's delusions beginning, Mrs. Dundas dismissed her lady's maid of 5 years and hired a new one, a dour woman by the name of Prentice. Furthermore, she has had a frequent visitor, a certain Dr. Ambrose, who does not come to the front door, but is admitted discreetly through the garden gate. This is all most curious. Before I could reply, there was a frantic pounding at our door, and a moment later Mr. Alistair Finch burst into the room, his face ashen with terror. "Mr. Holmes, thank God I have found you in," he gasped. "It is Eleanor. She is gone." "Gone?" Holmes demanded, rising to his feet. "Explain yourself." "I received a wire from her an hour ago," the solicitor cried, waving a crumpled piece of paper. "It just says, 'Help me, the Aspen.'" Then nothing. I went to the house in Richmond at once. The servant said she had gone out for a walk and had not returned. Mortimer was locked in his study and refused to see me. He seems completely unconcerned. "Mr. Holmes, I fear that in his madness he has done her some harm." Holmes took the telegram and studied it. "The Aspen," he mused. "Does that name mean anything to you, Mr. Finch?" "Nothing. It is gibberish." "Perhaps not." Holmes strode to his bookshelf and pulled down a large gazetteer of the home counties. He flipped through it rapidly. "Ah, here we are. The Aspens. A large secluded country estate in Surrey near the village of Oxshott. It was sold 2 years ago and has been operating as what does it say here? A private sanatorium for nervous disorders. A private asylum, in other words." My blood ran cold. "Holmes, the visitor, Dr. Ambrose, the secret visits." "Precisely, Watson. The pieces are beginning to fall into place. Mr. Dundas is not the villain here. He is the victim. He is being systematically gaslighted, not by his wife, but by the woman who has taken her place. And I suspect that this sanatorium is where the real Mrs. Dundas is being held prisoner. Come, gentlemen, there is not a moment to lose. The game is afoot." Within minutes, the three of us were in a hansom cab, racing towards Waterloo Station. Holmes had brought with him a heavy Gladstone bag, which I knew from experience contained not only his scientific instruments, but also a revolver and a loaded hunting crop. During the train journey to Oxshott, Holmes finally laid out his theory for us, his voice low and urgent. "It was the scar that was the key," he explained, "or rather the lack of it. A man like Dundas would not be mistaken on such a point. Therefore, the woman we met was not the woman he married. But if she was not Eleanor Dundas, who was she? The mention of a twin sister, supposedly dead, was too great a coincidence to ignore. My hypothesis was simple. Clara Finch did not die. She escaped or was released from the asylum. She is a woman who has been wronged in her view by her family. She is clever, manipulative, and bears a perfect resemblance to her sister. Her plan was audacious. With an accomplice, this mysterious Dr. Ambrose, who no doubt runs the Aspens, she abducted the real Eleanor. She then took her place in the Richmond house. Her goal was not to simply step into her sister's life. It was far more insidious. She knew of Dundas's precise scientific nature, so she deliberately introduced tiny errors, the sugar, the wrong poetry, the music hall tunes, designed to prey on his mind. She could not replicate the scar, so she relied on its absence as the final damning piece of proof. Her goal was to have Dundas, the only man who could spot the inconsistencies, declared insane and committed. With him out of the way and the real Eleanor imprisoned, Clara and her accomplice would have free rein over the Dundas fortune. "My God!" whispered Finch, his face a mask of horror. "Clara, alive, I cannot believe it. The fake Eleanor, Clara, made a mistake today, Holmes continued. She grew impatient. She sent you that telegram to make you believe that Dundas had harmed his wife, hoping it would hasten his committal. But in doing so, she gave us the very clue we needed to find her sister. Our journey ended at the quiet country station of Oxshott. A short carriage ride brought us to a pair of high iron gates, behind which stood a grim grey stone mansion surrounded by dense woods of aspen and birch. A sign by the gate read, "The Aspens, a place of rest and convalescence. Dr. R. Ambrose, proprietor." "We cannot go to the front door," Holmes said, paying the driver. "They will be expecting us. We must approach from the rear." He led us on a wide detour through the damp, silent woods. The house was forbidding, with small, barred windows on the upper floors. As we drew closer, a faint sound reached us. A woman's voice, raised in a desperate cry, abruptly cut short. "That came from the ground floor, on the west wing," Holmes hissed. "That must be it. Now we must be swift and silent." We crept through the overgrown gardens to a window that was dark and shuttered. Holmes produced a thin steel jemmy from his bag and in a moment of expert leverage prized the window open. We slipped inside, one by one, into what appeared to be a disused consulting room. The house was deathly quiet. We moved down a long dark corridor, our footsteps muffled by a thick carpet. From behind a heavy oak door at the end of the hall we could hear voices. A man's, low and menacing, and a woman's, pleading. Holmes did not hesitate. He put his shoulder to the door and burst into the room with a force that sent the lock splintering. The scene before us was stark. The room was sparsely furnished, like a cell. On a simple bed sat the real Mrs. Eleanor Dundas, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes blazing with defiance. Standing over her were two figures. One was a large, brutish-looking man who I took to be an orderly. The other, holding a syringe, was a tall man with a cruel, thin-lipped face, Dr. Ambrose. And standing by the window, a look of shocked fury on her face, was the woman we had met in Richmond. It was Clara Finch. Seeing her sister, the real Eleanor cried out, "Alistair, thank God!" "Holmes, you meddling fool!" snarled Dr. Ambrose, lunging for a heavy poker by the fireplace. But he was too slow. Holmes's hunting crop whistled through the air and caught the doctor squarely on the wrist. The syringe flew from his grasp and shattered on the floorboards. In the same motion I threw myself at the orderly, and being a man of some considerable strength in those days, brought him crashing to the ground. Mr. Finch, with a roar of protective rage, rushed to his true sister's side. Clara was the only one who remained still. She stared at Holmes, her expression of shock turning to one of pure, venomous hatred. "You!" she spat. "How did you know?" "Your sister's telegram was your undoing," Holmes said calmly, his revolver now levelled at Dr. Ambrose. "But your greatest error was to underestimate the man you tried to destroy. Mr. Dundas is a brilliant observer. You could replicate the face, but not the soul, not the million tiny habits and memories that make up a shared life. You gave him the evidence, and he, in his own way, solved the case. He simply arrived at the wrong conclusion." The arrival of the local constabulary, whom Holmes had shrewdly wired from London, put an end to the affair. Dr. Ambrose and his brutish assistant were taken into custody. But as the officers approached Clara, she gave a wild, unearthly laugh. "You think you have won?" she shrieked, her eyes wild. "I have had my revenge. I showed them all what it was to be locked away, to be told you are not who you are." He will never look at her again without wondering, without searching for the flaws. Before anyone could stop her, she darted to the shattered syringe on the floor, snatched up a large shard of glass, and drew it swiftly and deeply across her own throat. It was a ghastly, terrible end, and we could do nothing but watch in horror as she collapsed, her mad ambitions bleeding out onto the dusty floor. Our return to Baker Street was a sombre one. Mr. and Mrs. Dundas were reunited, though I suspected it would be a long time before the shadows of this dreadful business would fully recede from their lives. The case of the Aspen Sanatorium proved to be a far-reaching scandal, and Dr. Ambrose was eventually transported for life for his role in this and other nefarious imprisonments. "A truly tragic case, Holmes," I remarked that evening as we sat by the fire once more. "A mind twisted by bitterness and a lifetime of perceived injustice." "Indeed, Watson," he replied, his voice thoughtful. "It is a reminder that the most dangerous criminals are not always the thugs and the thieves. They are often the ones who operate in the subtle grey borderlands of the human mind. In this case, our client was a man driven to the brink of madness simply by telling the truth. It is a sobering thought." He picked up his violin, and as the first melancholic notes of a Brahms lullaby filled the fog-bound room, I knew that the great engine of his mind was, for a time at least, at peace, having navigated one of the most singular and psychologically disturbing cases of his long and illustrious career.